I grew up in a suburban neighborhood of a city called Bombay in India, which does not exist anymore. It has been changed to Mumbai. It's the same city but different name, and that's all. And I lived in a very small area of it called Mahim, which was on the sea, on the beach. It's a beach town. Bombay was a set of 7 different atolls, and the fishing villagers lived on those atolls, and they fished. That's all it was. And then somehow the Portuguese and the Brits found it and decided that it should all be put together, because what they found was one of those atolls had a great approach into the harbor. So the Portuguese name, I think, for safe harbor is Bombay, I think. So that's one of the things, and it kind of matched with what the fishing folks worshipped, was this goddess of prosperity and water called Mumba. So maybe it all worked out in that way. So both names have now come into play, Bombay and Mumbai. So that's where I was born, brought up. Mahim was a suburb at that time when I was being brought up. Right now it's swallowed into the whole city, and the city has expanded in all directions. The tentacles have gone 30 kilometers that way, 50 kilometers that way, 20 kilometers that way, and all. And it's a big, huge metropolis at the moment. So I went to school there. I went to my first year of college there, and that's it. When I was growing up, there was like radio, but only from like 5 p.m. in the evening till about 10 at night, and about 6:30 in the morning till about 8:30 in the morning. That's all there was, the radio. No television or anything. So what I actually listened to was, most of the time, was students who were studying tabla, the instrument that I play, with my father, who's my teacher. So they were the ones who were coming in and out daily, and so all day long that's what was going on. So that was the major sound that I actually heard. Apart from that, we were living near a mosque. Not a mosque actually, it was a kind of a shrine, not a Muslim shrine, but a Sufi shrine. And at that shrine, on every Thursdays and most days on Friday, Thursdays late into the night and Fridays all through the day, would be the Qawwali singers. This is a Sufi form of spiritual singing, and it's part of something called zikr. And so those singers would come, and different parties of Qawwalis. So each party would have 2 lead singers, a drummer, and a melodic accompaniment, and people sit clapping in the back and replying back what the lead singers were singing. So that's what used to happen. And so that's another thing that I grew up with every week. Thursday late into the night till 3 or 4 in the morning, and Friday all day long this went on, and different groups came and did that. So that was another thing that I grew up with. So on the radio, mostly Indian film music, some Indian classical music and folk music, but mostly Indian film music, but this was the other element. I think my father sort of planted the seed of me wanting to play tabla. When I was 2 days old after I was born and I was brought home, the tradition is that the baby is handed over to the father, and then the father must whisper a prayer in the ear of the child. So that's the first words that the child should hear in its ear. So when I was handed over to my father, instead of saying prayers in my ear, he started saying rhythm syllables. And so my mother was a little bit irritated, and she said, "What are you doing? You're supposed to say a proper prayer in his ear." And he said, "This is my prayer. This is what I pray through, and I pray to the goddess of knowledge and rhythm, and the god of time, which is Lord Ganesha, through this." And this is very interesting because he was Muslim. a conservative Muslim, but yet he prayed to the goddess Saraswati, a Hindu goddess, who was the goddess of knowledge, of music, of art, and the god Lord Ganesha, the elephant god, who was considered the god of rhythm. And so that's what he did. And so his routine was every day he would just whisper rhythms in my ear. So by the time I was 3, I was already had all this mumbo jumbo in my head, and I had no clue how to make any sense out of it. But somehow I figured out that what I had in my head has something to do with those drums that were being played by the students, and slowly I got into it. So by the time I was 3.5 or 4, I had started to play, but my father wouldn't teach me. He would let his students kind of guide me a little bit, and he would just watch. He didn't want to in any way impose this on me. He just wanted to make sure that when I'm ready, that it would come out, and then he would take me. And if I wasn't ready, then it would never come out, and it would just go away. So it wasn't like I was his son, so I had to do it. There was no such thing. So by the time I was 7, I was playing a school concert, and he came. All the school students played a little bit, so I played, show and tell, whatever. And I played, and then that night at dinner, he said, "Do you want to seriously study this?" He had seen some spark at that point. And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "Okay, we'll start tomorrow." So tomorrow was 3 a.m. in the morning. He woke me up, and then when everyone else slept, he started talking to me about rhythms and where they come from and the lineage and the compositions. And so for the next few years, this was the routine. He'd wake me up at about 2 or 3 in the morning, and we'd do this till about 6 in the morning until it was time for me to go, get ready, and go to the madrasa to study the Quran, because I'm born Muslim. And after I had studied about the Hindu gods and goddesses and stuff from him, a Muslim, then I'd go and study the Quran. And then after that, I'd cross the street and go to St. Michael's High School Church, where we would sing the hymns and the psalms and stuff, and then be shunted to our classrooms, where I would do my academic studies. So that was the routine. So from 7 years old, serious learning began. Before that, just boom, 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 until I was 12, and then I was starting to play professionally. I, as a 12-year-old, went into the Indian film industry and became a session musician playing there. That was an interesting place to be, because Indian film industry was, in my opinion, the first real place where an attempt was being made to somehow fuse or have interaction between different forms of music. So we were sitting in a room, and in the center was the rhythm section, sitting on 1, 2, 3, 4 tables, 4 rhythm section people. On our left, towards the wall, were the woodwinds, including oboe, bassoon, clarinet, Indian flute, Shehnai, Indian Shehnai, and so they were all there. On this side of us were stringers. So there will be Indian style violin player, a sarangi player, a dilruba player, sitar player, sarod player, santoor player. So they were all around, and 1 mic each for each group. That's all it was. On the opposite end was lined up the whole string section. First violin, second violin, violas, cellos, basses, they were all lined up. And their whole point was to be able to fill in behind, provide the codas, whatever, and stuff like that for the orchestra. And in one of the rooms, sort of like a tube-like ISO booth, would be the singer. And then we would all perform, and of course we had to play live. And if one of us made a mistake, we had to stop and then do it all over again. So that's the process I went through. And in doing so, I heard various combinations of these string sections. At times we would be doing jazz, so the basses were playing upright bass, walking bass. At times we'd be doing some classical elements, so they would do that. At times the composers And what was interesting was the composer was an Indian, but his arranger, who arranged the whole orchestra, was a mixed breed, like a son or a daughter of a Portuguese and an Indian parent, or a British or an Indian parent, or a French or an Indian parent, and they grew up learning Western music. So they'd be the ones who'd find a way to make the orchestral element of the Western side somehow work with Indian elements. So I grew up in that atmosphere. So it was, from the very first day of my going into a recording studio to do this stuff is when I started listening to all this. Even in the old days, whether it was concertos or sonatas or whatever, the cadenzas were improvised. And later on, it became more of a norm to be able to write it out for the benefit of the conductor and the orchestra. But most maestros used to improvise their cadenzas. So improv is built into the seed of the process of being able to create music in the Western classical world. What we do differently in India is that when we are learning our tradition or music, we are simultaneously learning how to disassemble and assemble it in various combinations and permutations, various shapes and so on. So in that process, we are learning to be able to be improvisers, where that ability is allowed to flower more so that your personal input becomes the prime mover of the music that you're playing. And so that's what makes the music very interesting and fun and so personal. If I'm playing tabla, like for instance, I'll give you an example. I have two other brothers who are also percussionists playing tabla and stuff. And all three of us studied with my father. But we all play differently. We all play different materials, different repertoires. And we are unique in our own way of putting the language together into a sentence or a paragraph or a whole chapter, whatever. So that happens. So this is a process that we all go through from the very start. When my father was teaching me, he would give me a phrase. He wouldn't give me the whole composition. He would just give me a phrase and say, okay, now I want you to be able to give me 20 combination permutation of this one phrase. It may be 5 notes or 8 syllables or whatever, and I would have to do that. So and then he would say, okay, take this phrase and do it in reverse, do it upside down, all sorts of stuff like that. So that was a process that we learned with, and that, I imagine, is the basic difference between the two. The world of jazz, of course, is a bridge between the Western classical system and an out-and-out improv system like Indian music or Middle Eastern music. And so it's great to see both existing in the world of jazz, which is such an incredible tradition, and America should be proud of having given that to the world. It's amazing. Oh, a long time ago. I probably in the mid 80s. It's because we have a very close friendship with Terry Riley, and as you know, Terry Riley studied Indian music, so we would have get-togethers where he would sing Indian music, and we'd all be there and playing and interacting and doing all that stuff. So over the years, since then, I've had a relationship with him, another gentleman named Shabda Khan, and so who used to make tanpuras and stuff. And so through them and through Terry, I was made aware of Kronos and their work. And originally, the curiosity was to see what they do with Terry's work. And then over the years, having heard that first, you get sucked in to what they do and the wonder of it all. So since then, mid 80s, that I've known about Kronos and I've seen their work. And then I think maybe 10, 12 years ago that we did our first thing where they asked me to play on a piece. Tonight is the Night, and then after that there was a whole CD with Asha Bhosle and R.D. Burman's music, her late husband, and so we did that project, and so the connection has been, how should I say, simmering for a while and cooking to a point where it is now ready to be hopefully sampled. The whole thing is a learning process, obviously, and the greatness of a genius lies in the revelation to himself or herself that he or she is but a student, and so greatness has been achieved, but there's miles to go before you sleep. So there's a lot to learn, and so I think it's you know, a learning experience and a humbling experience to watch an established group like Kronos still reaching out to find out more, learn more, and figure out how they can grow further, how they can, you know, find different colors and shades in their music, and what's out there that's going to enhance what already exists within themselves even further. So it's great to see that happen, and I think that was the seed idea behind it. With my involvement, I imagine they wanted to understand a little bit more about how the ragas work, how the rhythm cycles work, how the learning process of Indian music as transmitted from a teacher to a student is done, because I guess one of the main ingredients of this 50 is that there would be others who would be able to benefit from it and learn from it and be able to play the pieces as laid out. So it's more like a book of music that is being created for future generations to be able to learn and play and understand the process of how it goes. So I figured that that's what was behind it with the idea, and I hope that we've been able to some degree explore that and put it forth. Well, one thing that you've encounter right at the beginning is that Indian music is more melodic. It deals with one note at a time, while Western music has harmonic ability, counterpoints, all those other stuff where while we think of a melody and just have that one note and then the next and the next and the next and it becomes a song or a melody, same thing is done with 4 or 5 layers simultaneously progressing through in the Western music. So that's one thing that always you know, gives, you know, makes you take a, you know, step back as to now how do we deal with that. So or whether we should deal with that or not, that's another thing. Rhythmically speaking, I am a firm believer that the rhythm is universal, you know, and it's all a pulse, and it just, somebody stops at 7, some stops at 9 or 15 or 18 or 20, and there are people who believe in tempos to be double layered, that like, okay, if you're stopping at 9, it's on the bar of 4. So 9/4. We don't look at it that way in Indian music. 9 is a 9. There is no bar of 4 there. It's a bar of 9. So it just changes in the thinking process in that way, slightly different. But universal rhythm is always the approach to take. I felt that there are 4 people in the string quartet, and each one projects a very individual personality and a chain of thought that they each have, and their own way of looking at how the notes are played and portrayed. And so I felt that that should be explored in some ways, and because we are not harmony oriented, one interesting way to be able to do that was to assign to each one of the musician one raga each. So first violin will have a raga, second would have a raga, viola and cello. They will all have their own raga scales, their own modes, and somehow find a way to select the modes in a way where they can, if they have to play together, interact well enough so it's not sounding a little weird in your ear, but might appear to be multitonal or harmonic. So that was the approach that I took with this. And so we have 4 ragas that we chose, and each one of them has one, and it's very clear when they come in how the modes change, first individually and then interaction between either the 2 of them or 3 of them or all 4 of them. And fortunately enough, when they were all working together, interacting in their own modes but simultaneously together, that the harmonic elements seemed to appear because of, and the multitonal elements worked well enough. And then I thought one step further. So rather than assigning just one basic rhythm to them, let's assign different layer of rhythms to them. So they also not only have a melodic face, but also a rhythmic prance. So each one of them, like one has a 6, one has an 8, one has 9, one has 12. So they are all existing in this different rhythm rotation, orbit. But it all is mathematically designed in a way where it all resolves at certain points. So not only we have a multi-tonal idea behind the piece, so sort of an Indian ragas but in a Western mode of thinking, and multi-rhythm idea as well. So rhythms are almost like canoning. And at points, the melodic elements are also doing the same thing. So that's what I thought would be an interesting way of explaining to not only Kronos, but to the future generations of how we work with multi-rhythms and how we are able to take a melodic idea and how a raga, which can have a 5-note ascending and descending scale, and then there's another raga which will have the same 5 notes, ascending and descending scale, but would be different because of the nuances, the microtones that are being used. So they can both coexist and they can both interact, but they will both be very different. So there are 2 ragas in this composition. One is Bhopali and one is Deshkar. So and they both have the same notes, same pentatonic scale, but one is played in the evening and one is played in the morning. And yet, because of the way you treat those ragas and where you put the stress on, what is the dominant and the subdominant note of these ragas, that they appear different and they improv differently. So that's another sort of a learning idea that was inserted into the play. So that's how I came up with the composition. It was more challenging for the person who had to write it out on a piece of paper. When you have these multi-rhythms and they are they're falling differently until they finally resolve. How do you arrange it in the bars the way they should be? So that was a very difficult thing. And I had an earlier gentleman named Alex Kelly who was helping me to write it out, but wasn't able to quite get to the point where it made perfect sense in its entirety. Elements of it made sense, but in its entirety it did not make sense. So then there was Reena that we brought in, and who has, of course, knowledge of Indian music as well. So eventually, with Alex having initiated certain points, Reena was able to take that whole thing and put it into a situation where Kronos could look at it and say, ah, that's what it is. Okay. So so the challenges were mainly there. For me, it was more like, okay, what I do is I first come up with the rhythmic idea. And the rhythmic idea came to me as I was thinking about my teacher, my father. And I said, okay, so how would he give a lesson out like this? And so it happened that in one of those nighttime gathering with my father, when the world slept and we talked, I think it was the 5th lesson that he gave me, which gave me which put into my mind the idea of 6 and 8 and 9 and 12, because this particular composition that he gave me, more like a vocabulary grammar table, that's what he gave me, navigated its way through all these different rhythmic elements, and at times one hand would do one and the other hand would do another one. So all that was happening. So I thought, well, maybe this would be the basis of it, and then we'll expand from there on. And so that input, I think, from my dad helped to solidify at least the base of it, and then we went from there. Oh God, I mean, I just yesterday finished my commission piece with Lions Ballet in Boston. We did 3 performances in Boston. We did 9 here last 2 weeks. And so that was a 73-minute piece, ballet piece that I wrote and performed live with them. So that was finished. I just recently did a tabla concerto, which was the first ever tabla concerto, or a concerto with a percussion instrument as a soloist, with a full symphony orchestra, and that was played by the National Symphony Orchestra at Kennedy Center, and Philharmonic in London, and Geneva, and so on. So that was another project that happened, and then there's this one, and then I'm just going on tour with some jazz musicians. Dave Holland, who's a great bassist, Chris Potter, who's a horn player, and I brought in some Indian practitioners of jazz. These are, again, those mixed breed kids of the Portuguese and Indian, and they're sort of unsung heroes because they are the ones who shaped what Bollywood or Indian film music is all about today. And they are the ones who kept the light burning as far as practicing, nurturing, preserving jazz in India, and never got a nod from anybody. And so I brought them along and put them up with Dave Holland and Chris Potter, and I'm hoping that it's going to be fun. So the very next day after we play this piece, we open our tour at Disney Hall in LA. I think it's I am behind Kronos all the way when it comes to thought and idea about this, and that is that never consider yourself a master. Just be a good student, and you'll get by just fine. Every day you learn something new. What's the point in thinking that you know everything? I mean, some great master once said, when he was told, "Oh, maestro, you were perfect today," and he said, "Sorry, son, I just haven't played good enough to quit yet." And that's a very profound statement. If you think you've done the best you can, or best ever, you might as well retire. And that's not what creativity in any area, whether it's arts of painting and sculpting or music or dance or anything, is all about.